Hey everybody, it's Jim here, and on this episode of the Audiomo podcast, things are going to be a little bit different. Ian, who has co-hosted with me on a few other episodes in the past, messaged me asking if I would be willing to answer 5 questions for him. He's working on a project interviewing gigging musicians about kind of their background, their history, how they formed, their current bands that they're in right now, as well as a few questions about the actual gigging process itself and some philosophy kind of things of that nature. If nothing else, you'll learn something that you definitely didn't know about me prior to viewing this. That being said, before we get started, it is just the Skype feed of everything because I wasn't sure if we were going to post this, but upon second thought it would be worthwhile. Maybe somebody would find it useful. So not HD quality camera, not HD quality microphones, but the content and the banter between two friends is more than enough for me. Hopefully you enjoy it. If not, I will, say sorry. Whatever. This is what it is. Hope you enjoy.
Interesting.
Yeah, like I said, they're real like base level questions, but it's useful. So, okay, all right, here we go. So, the first one is: how did you come to perform in the style or genre of music that you prefer?
How did I come to perform in the style that I prefer? Well, when I first started, that was not the case. I started off as the drummer. And I met a guy a few houses down from me that played guitar. And he played a Stratocaster. That's where this all started. And we just started jamming, and it was a lot of fun. And that band was really, really poppy. And tying it into this question, I got so tired of playing that style of music that I knew I couldn't write what I wanted to on drums with the genre by itself with just the drums. So I bought the Squire Strat. And I had my friend, it was Ken, was the guitar player. I had him show me a few really basic things. And I figured it out. And then I just started writing on guitar what I wanted to write. And thankfully, at that time, what I wanted to write was a lot of power chords and punk rock. So I was up and running. I had a band after that. About 6-7 months later, I was already out and playing. And that was that.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny that actually, because that's really sort of similar to my experience, which is really fascinating, like in different kind of ways, which was kind of my older brothers were into like classic rock and passing like a load of that on. So I originally was kind of into the whole cheesy, Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, all the mainstream stuff and Silverchair. But when I started playing guitar, obviously I was like got into kind of bands like Blink because I was like, oh, I can actually do that now. And I just wanted to gig. I just had a lack of patience. So then just went and literally, did that. So it's funny I wonder how many people have got a similar story where it's like, just want to get out there and kind of do it.
Well, it helped a lot too that a lot of that music that we liked, because we're like the same age, was so easy, but it was fun. So the area, the barrier to entry was not nearly as high. Like if you were a brand new player and you started listening to Polyphia and you're like, oh, I want to play like that. Yeah, good luck. You're not going out and gigging for a while. It's not going to be the same kind of thing.
God, yeah. Can you imagine? That's the thing that's insane with like bands like that. I can't even imagine like starting out and trying to approach that.
I'd quit. I'd go to the clarinet.
Yeah, God knows what I'd be playing. Tambourine or something. The next one is literally is quite a simple one. It's just like, how did you come to join the music making group you're a part of now? So I know you do stuff with the wife, but
I play with the wife. That just happened because I used to drink too much, and every night when I would get home or walk home from work in San Diego, I would stop at the same bar, and she was the bartender there. And one night you know how when you drink too much, sometimes a song will come on and you'll sing even if you're not a singer. I started doing that, and she started singing too. And then we started singing the Always Sunny in Philadelphia's Dayman song. And she's like, oh, she's like, that's really cool. She's like, do you play music? And then it was just, we started talking, and before long, she was just at my house and brought the ukulele and some songs, and the rest is history, I guess.
Nice. That's it's fascinating that it can work. That's cool to learn, actually. Really cool.
Yeah, small world.
Yeah, definitely. And then the next one. This is a big one. I liked this one. It was, what do you value most about your music making activities? quite a big question, that one, to just be hit with.
What do I value most? For myself or when I perform? I feel like that's two very separate answers.
Yeah, funny enough, that basically leads on to the next question. So this one I think is more focused for you. What do you
Okay. I get a satisfaction out of it that comes when I have an idea and it doesn't always come off. But when it does come off and I know I've done it on my own, I don't care if nobody hears it. It's just this internal just happiness of like, oh my God, like I made something that was up here actually audible for myself, and then potentially that can go into a song or something like that. I find so much fun in the creative process, and also just looking at things as challenges of ways to implement things. Sometimes I'll be hearing a record for the first time, and a chord that I've heard a million times will just be randomly in there in a position where I've never heard it before, and I'll think, how can I implement that in that way? And then that becomes the initial exercise that I talked about. And it doesn't always come off, but when it does, when you really figure it out, it's like that satisfaction of just like understanding and implementing it. I love that part of it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's one of those kind of magic things, isn't it? Like you say, the challenge and this has been a fascinating thing in the study for me, actually, is there's been a lot of, the last thing we had to read was basically this guy he had a journal that he did for every gig he did. He was a jazz musician between 1920 and 1968. And he basically, they've obviously we've not read all of it, they've just put certain things to do with performance, and he talks about, like the jazz standards and how they decide repertoire on the night, because he'd never met the musicians and he was often gigging at like sort of bars during like obviously like prohibition style times and stuff like that. And it was really fascinating to hear his practice was essentially his experience. Like, and just kind of, he was like, well, I know this, I know that, and then he was kind of trying to read the room and do things, and then he always put these little bits, like the games he played with himself I found fascinating, where he'd throw a really dissonant chord in to see if he could stop people eating and stuff like that. And it just, you kind of think it's fascinating when you've got that much experience, how like things creep in to be like, okay, I want to keep this creative, I don't just want to do the same,
Yeah,
I found it kind of quite a fascinating account, especially as it's obviously a really wildly different time and experience.
Yeah, especially back then. That's a very, very astute thing to do. That's something I like to do too. I like making people, even if it's just awkward or uncomfortable, randomly where they feel like they shouldn't. That's part of the journey of it, and it keeps people on their toes and it keeps them attentive, I've found.
Yeah, definitely. Funny enough, I was thinking about, when I was reading that, I was wondering about how much whether it was like a cadence thing. Like, I'm hoping when I read on, I find out like whether it was, because they made it sound like it was just random chord selection, but obviously I'm sure it wasn't. But I'm wondering if he had any thoughts on whether it was like throw in, like a really sort of interrupted cadence or something, to just, if it was like if it was that deliberate, or if it was just literally this will sound weird and hit him with it, kind of. I'd love to know the thought process in more detail.
Maybe it was both.
Yeah, true. And then the next one, leading on from that, is what would you hope an audience gains from one of your performances?
That's a very easy one. All I want, whenever people come to see, whether when I'm playing while I wipe now or whenever I was going to play, was for them to not think about what other bad shit was going on in their day-to-day life. I want any performance to remove people from all of that stuff. It should be one of those things where if you really connect with the music, that's even better. But if you're putting on a good enough performance where for that 45-minute set or whatever, however long it is, the people, they're only there for that. They're in that moment. They're not concerned about anything else. Like that, to me, if you can provide that for somebody as a performer, I think you've done your job.
Nice. Well, yeah, that's awesome way of looking at it. I think, like you said, it's kind of two levels, isn't it? Like you say, making people forget what's going on, and then the actual connection, they're kind of two. I think people sometimes almost fuse those two things and expect too much, don't they? Whereas I think actually separating them out is kind of much more sensible. And I think that's, for me, sound a little bit dismissive here, but that's how I can tell an experienced musician from an inexperienced one, when they separate those things out.
No, but it's so true. It's one of those things you don't learn until you do it, because everybody, when you start, has this expectation, I'm going to capture the whole audience. My songs are so good. I can't wait for that. There's always going to be somebody at the venue. There might be several people. It might be everybody. You might just have a bad gig or be booked poorly. That also happens. Your stuff could be really good. You could end up playing in a situation with other bands where it doesn't work. It's just not going to work for you. You're going to get disappointed. You're going to see people staring at their phones. You're going to see people having conversations. That's part of it. You're never we're not all Incubus or Muse or one of these bands where, everybody is just so zoned into it. For an average person that's regularly doing this, the more you do it, the more you accept that. So it actually gives you a greater appreciation when you see people that are not doing that really are really locked in to what you're doing and enjoying it and taking the moment for what it is.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting, kind of, like you say, that experience. It's funny you say that, because I think I've always said to any like local bands that are quite young around here, go and do a gig in London without telling them what happens, because that first gig in London being only half an hour away, every young band does the same thing, where they think, oh, it's London, this is, and what happens is you find this word eclectic used in London, and what it means is the venue booker has no fucking idea what type of band you are, what type of band anyone else on the bill is. So you might be an emo band like we were, playing directly after a jazz funk band like we did, and then you've got yourself a problem with the crowd for both bands, in terms of like expectations and reality. And I think it's only when that happens to you directly, and I think it's important to learn it yourself, not have someone older tell you. I think once that happens, you then go, I need to take more control over how our gigs are booked. Like, I need to ask more questions, because when you're young, you're doing that thing where you're like, oh, we've been offered a gig in London, this is, and it's that ego thing and that excitement, and you have to make that mistake, because you have to turn up and go, oh my god, like there's a bunch of people in cardigans staring at us, like, that are expecting, they're not going to be happy when the first like heavy section so it's a big learning curve that I think everyone needs to go through, I think, isn't it? It's
Yes, but it's true, though. When we were younger, we didn't listen to older people that knew what the hell they were talking about. I was like, you're stupid. I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to be the one that changes everything. That's not how it works. So it's what you said is true. You have to actually do it yourself to really understand and be like, oh, I get it now. Because New York was very much like that. San Diego was a lot easier, because it was for the majority of the live music, there's kind of either like softer indie or reggae or covers or ska / surf music. So when we would play, we were kind of like more on the harder surf stuff. If we got booked with like a softer reggae band, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, it wasn't, emo to jazz difference, but you did notice people in the crowd like, I don't think this is quite right.
Yeah. I love stuff like, what I love is that we realize as well how the genres that you're aware of aren't what everyone else is aware of. My favorite comment ever made to me when I was about 14, and one of my first bands, I was in a pop punk band, and this guy came up to me round our local area. It was kind of like older people were into ska, and he came up to me and he went, your band's okay, it's a bit weird, it's like ska without any of the brass. And I was like, he was so unaware of pop punk that to him he just took that and like minus stuff off to get to us. And I thought that was a really fascinating way of looking at something, because obviously at the time it makes you laugh, and then you get a bit older and you kind of go, of course, like people's frame of reference is just different, right? Like, it's kind of, but yeah, I found that comment has always stuck with me, and I sort of try to do it with everything. Like, when I'm explaining stuff or thinking in my head about bands that are described as genre bending, I try to find a funny phrase to help me understand from my frame of reference how I dial it over. And just as a fun activity. And then there's only literally, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, that's how I feel about, I was just talking about reggae and ska. Like, I always have the bookmark, or my benchmark bands are like the Slackers and the Toasters. And I think about, okay, that's like traditional for those kinds of genres that are modern-ish. And whenever people say, "Oh, I'm going to a show of this style," that's what I'm expecting. But then when I actually get there, obviously it's very varied. And then I do the same trick that you do. I kind of piece together things in my head to be like, well, what would I call this? Not that it matters. It's just kind of a fun exercise.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of like that building expectation for next time, isn't it? Like you're always expanding that frame of reference, especially as, you know, people start mixing stuff together or trying to do something slightly, you know, off piste or whatever. But yeah. And then the last question is literally, when you have a gig coming up, what's the most important thing to you in your practice to make you feel like you can give everything to the performance?
Not having to think about anything related to the performance, not having to think about anything. And that is very simple. That is just a matter of knowing your shit inside and out, period. Because the more that I can not focus on that, not look at my guitar, the more I can engage with the audience, the more I can have fun, the more I can move around on stage, the more that, you know, everything is infectious. If you go up and you see somebody who is incredible, but they're standing still, they're staring down, they're not moving, it doesn't make you want to move, because just the way that humans interact with each other, where we kind of play off of each other. So if you see somebody that's really moving, or somebody that's really into what they're doing, or genuinely looks like they're having fun and it looks effortless to them, then you're kind of inclined, even as just an observer or the audience member in this case, to kind of play off that. Maybe you'll start moving and you'll start dancing. Next thing you know, like, everybody's kind of more involved in it. So the better prepared you are, the more opportunity you have to grab that, because that's when something's special. Because the difference between a show that you really remember and just like, oh, that was a good show, might be that right there, where you were able to just really let loose because it looked like, oh, this is the normal. Like, everybody's here is having a good time. Everybody's just dancing around or, you know, bobbing their heads and stuff like that. That's the stuff that is hard to practice at home, because you can't prepare for that. But what you can do is prepare yourself well enough so that you're not worried about, oh, what pedal do I have to hit for this? Oh my God, I forgot. Where is this last breakdown for this? Should I throw a vamp in on this song? Or how long will the vamp be for this song? Should it be? Nah, just go in prepared with your stuff, know what you're doing, and the rest is just fun. Because that's what this is supposed to be when you go out and play live. Fun.
Awesome. Yeah, no, exactly. That's yeah, and it's really fascinating actually. That's like picking up on a couple of those points, because that's exactly, like, even reading some stuff, I didn't realize how accidentally narrow my frame of reference was. Because you saying about the moving thing's really fascinating, because obviously I move a lot, always have done kind of on stage, but I find I was reading this bit about, oh God, just her name's just escaped me, but she's a trumpet player, and there was an interview as part of that thing with her, and basically she was saying, you know, when she's playing in these classical pieces, what she will do is even move her like head side to side for like whimsical bits. And she said, like, the body language, even subtle movement, is really important, even in a classical thing where everyone's sitting down and supposed to just warmly applaud at the end. She's like, it's still a performance. Like, there's still things you can do with your body to give the audience something to look at, to distinguish it between a recording and a live performance. And I thought, it's really funny, because I was like, of course that makes sense, and of course they do stuff like that. But because of my background, I've always just associated moving with like rock bands, you know, and I know that's not true, but it's that accident. And what's been really fascinating for me on this course so far is actually opening up that frame of reference a little bit more and making me realize things I'm just not paying attention to, which is really cool. So yeah.
Well, for reference here, if you want to talk about people that don't play rock, that are, you know, at the top of their craft right now, that are well-known guitarists that do this really well, what you just kind of mentioned, not this traditional, I'm jumping up and down, I'm kicking things, I'm flinging my guitar around my head, because that's what most people think of when you're like, oh, have fun on stage, move around. No, like Yvette Young does what you just mentioned there with the trumpet player. She just kind of like sways with her guitar, and she's playing so intricately, but like the fact that she just, her movements are so in sync with the music, you can tell that her body is really engaged with the music itself and how she's performing, and it really rubs off with the vibe of everything. Amazing at that. And then in a different style of music, you have Corey Wong. Corey Wong is just always just like, it's fun. Like he's just kind of like jumping on. It looks like a child. He genuinely looks like a child when he's performing. He's just stomping his feet, really just, it's great. It's just such a refreshing thing to see people that not only take the technical performance seriously enough where it's just like there's no mistakes, because that's great. That should be the standard. You should be going in and playing your own stuff, 99% accurate without making mistakes. They're going to happen once in a while. But the second half of it, which those two have mastered, is really incorporating the physical part of it as well for the performance itself. And as you said, that's what really is going to differentiate between just sitting back and listening to a perfectly produced and recorded record versus seeing them live, and what will make you want to continue to give that band or that artist money to see them live the second time or the next time they come into your town.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's it. It's it's been really cool. But thank you for that as well. I'll stop recording now anyway. And